Reeling had just finished 12 hours of play and had ordered in a tray of pork dumplings and doused them in hot Vietnamese red rooster sauce and chopsticked them into his mouth as fast as he could chew. And now he was ready to relax with some more after-work play. For this, he always used his own tune, a char he'd started playing with when he was a boy in Gansu, training it, dressing it in the rarest of treasures. In some ways, this tune was him so long he lived with it. He had trained up innumerable tunes and seen them sold off, but this one was his. Tonight, Reeling partied with farmers he knew from other parts of China, some of whom he'd known back in his village, some of whom he'd never met. They were a ferocious nightly raiding guild that pulled off the hardest missions in the world. They were the cream of the crop. Word had gotten round, and now every night he had an audience of players who'd just been hired on, watching in awe as he kicked fantastic quantities of ass. He loved that, loved answering their questions when he was done playing, helping the whole team get better, and you know they loved him too, and that was just great. So they ran Buri's fortress, the palace of a long-departed god, the father of all the gods, the powerful elemental force that had birthed the game's Svartalfheim warriors and the universe in which it lay. It had fearsome guardians and required powerful spells just to reach, and had never been run in the entire history of Svartalfheim warriors. It was just the kind of mission Reeling loved to try. This would be his sixth crack at it, and he was prepared to raid for 6 hours straight, if that's what it took. And so was the rest of his party. And then he got Fenrir's tooth. It was the rarest and most legendary drop in all of Svartalfheim warriors, a powerful talisman that could turn any wolf pack or enthrall them to the tooth's holder. The message boards have been full of talk about it, and several times there have been fraudulent auctions for it, but no one had ever seen it before. After Reeling picked it up, it had come from an epic battle with an army of sky giants in which the entire raiding party had been killed over and over again. He was so stunned that for a moment he couldn't speak, just pointed at the screen while his mouth opened and shut. The players watching him fell silent too, following his gaze and his finger, slowly realizing what had just happened. A murmur built through the crowd, picking up steam, picking up volume, turning into a roar, a triumphant shout that brought the entire cafe over to see. Over the computer fans' noise, they buzzed excitedly, a hormone-drenched, triumphant tribal chest-beating exercise that swept them all up. Every boy imagined what it would be like to go questing with Fenrir's tooth. Every boy's heart thudded in his chest. But there was another sound, getting louder and more insistent. An older voice, raspy with a million cigarettes. A hard voice. Sit down, back to work, everyone back to work. It was Wang, the foreman, shouting with his fearsome Fujianese accent. He was rumored to be an ex-snakehead, thrown out of the human smuggling gang for killing migrants with his rough treatment. Usually he sat lizard-like and motionless in the corner, smoking a succession of cheap Chinese Class D fake Marlboros, a lazy curl of smoke giving him a permanent squint on one side of his face. Sometimes the players would forget that he was there, and their horseplay and laughter would get out of control, and he would sneak up behind them on cat-silent feet and deliver a stunning blow to the ear that would send them reeling. It was enough of an object lesson, don't make the snakehead mad or he'll lay a beating on you, that he hardly ever had to repeat it. Now, though, he was clouting boys left and right, bellowing orders in his loud, hoarse voice. The boys retreated to their computers in a shoving rush, leaving Reeling alone in his seat, an uncertain smile on his face. "Boss," he said, "you see what I've done?" He pointed to his screen. Wang's face was as impassive as ever. He put a hard, heavy hand on Reeling's shoulder and leaned in to read the screen, his head wreathed in smoke. Finally, he straightened. "Fenrir's tooth," he said. He nodded. "A bonus for your Reeling. Very good." Reeling shrank back. "Boss," he said respectfully, speaking loudly to be heard over the computer fans. "Boss, that's my character. I'm not working now. It's my personal character." Wang turned to look at him, his eyes hard and his expression flat. "A bonus," he said again. "Well done." "It's my character," Reeling said, speaking more loudly. "No bonus, it's mine. I earned it personally on my own time." He didn't even see the blow, it was that fast. One minute he was hotly declaring that Fenrir's tooth was his, the next he was sprawled on the floor, his head ringing like a gong. The foreman put one foot on his throat. The man said, "No bonus," clearly and distinctly so that everyone could hear. Then he hawked up a huge mouthful of poisonous green spit from the tar-soaked depths of his blackened lungs and carefully spat it in Ruiling's face. From the age of 4, Ruiling had practiced wushu, training with a man in the village whom all the adults deferred to. The man had been sent north during the Cultural Revolution, denounced and beaten and starved, but he had never broken. He was as gentle and patient as a grandmother, and he was as old as the hills, and he could send an attacker flying through the air with a flick of the wrist, break a board with his old hands, kick you into the next life with one ancient, gnarled foot. For 12 years, Ruiling had gone to train with him 3 times a week to train with the old man. All the boys had. It had just been part of life in the village. He hadn't practiced since he'd come to South China, had all but forgotten that relic of a different land. But now he remembered every lesson, remembered it deep in his muscles. He gripped the ankle of the foot that was on his throat, twisted just slightly to gain maximum leverage, and applied a small controlled bit of pressure and threw the foreman into the air, sending him sailing in a perfect graceful arc that terminated when his head cracked against the side of one of the long trestle tables, knocking it over and sending a dozen flat screens tumbling to the ground, the crash audible over the fans. Ruiling stood carefully and faced the foreman. The man was groaning on the ground, and Ruiling couldn't keep a small grin off of his face. That had felt good. He found that he was standing in a ready stance, weight balanced evenly on each foot, feet spread for stability, body side on to the man on the ground, presenting a smaller target. His hands were loosely held up, one before the other, ready to catch a punch and lock the arm and throw the attacker, ready to counterstrike high or low. The boys around him were cheering, chanting his name, and Ruiling smiled more broadly. The foreman picked himself up off the floor, no expression at all on his face, a terrible blankness, and Ruiling felt his first inkling of fear. Something about how the man held himself as he stood, not anything like the stance in the martial arts games he played in the village, something altogether more serious. Ruiling heard a high, whining noise and realized it was coming from his own throat. He lowered his hand slightly, extended one in a friendly palm-up way. "Come on now," he said, "let's be adults about this." And that's when the foreman reached under the shoulder of his ill-fitting, rumpled, dander-speckled suit jacket and pulled out a cheap little pistol. And that's as much as I'm going to read.